Broadcast in English only. I will try and continue this broadcast using both languages. The response to English only has been less than terrific, which I understand these things take time. I also understand there are a great many people doing this kind of thing. So the viewing audience certainly has multiple options as who they choose to listen to. Uh, it's not an easy choice because although the information people like myself may put forth uh, may be scientifically accurate, the point is, does it apply to you individually? And that's a difficult thing to assess unless you have a great deal of knowledge beforehand. So, as a precursor to teaching more exercise online, the actual performance and the precautions, muscles involved, what activities are indicated by this particular exercise or supported by this exercise. I thought I'd step back a minute and to talk about some of the basics even before you begin, especially a muscular conditioning program. Uh, on Kenko Jojo in the English broadcast, we've covered the aerobics aspects, aerobic conditioning, the guidelines that you should adhere to, and I think that's archived. So if you have the opportunity, please take a look at that. I'd like to focus tonight primarily on resistance training, uh, what you should do, how you should do it, not necessarily what you do is a personal choice. Uh, there is a great deal of information regarding muscular conditioning out there. Uh, I have a library of information regarding conditioning, aerobic and stretching, perhaps 10 volumes, muscular conditioning, probably about 200. It seems like everybody has a take on it. It is true over the years, certainly the 50 years that I've been involved, approaches to muscular conditioning have not so much changed as compartmentalized. Uh, it used to be you train for muscular size and that's what you get. Now the people uh, who do this, who research this for a living, college professors engaged in exercise physiology, research facilities, differentiate between performance, strength improvement, and muscular size and development. So, three different ways, three different results, and within that, several different methods used to enhance each of those different parameters. So, but I want to get down to basics here. When you approach muscular conditioning, ideally you should have a clear cut objective as to where you want to go. So you can differentiate between strength improvement, muscular size, or performance. Health considerations put aside for the moment. So when you perform an exercise, keep in mind, and this has come under some scrutiny lately, what people call the range of motion. And the range of motion is how the joint moves through the full range of uh, extension and contraction of the movement. For example, a bicep curl, your arm would be fully extended, and then the muscle would be fully contracted. So that's the criteria. The muscle must move from its fully extended point to its fully contracted point under resistance. Now, how that resistance is applied uh, is another topic that I should probably save for another time because it's somewhat confusing and convoluted. Uh, you cannot simply do the exercise. There's assessment of how much resistance you should use, whether you perform the exercise slowly or quickly, uh, what level of intensity in terms of how much time should you rest. These are all concerns about uh, performance of the exercise, and hopefully in further episodes we'll cover those things. But keep in mind a range of motion is critical to muscular development. Now, recently, perhaps if you go to a gym already, you'll see people doing partial movements with very, very heavy weight. For example, if a person can do a full movement, full bench press, which is laying prone and pushing the weight off your chest. The range of movement is the bar comes to the chest and extends to your arms are fully extended. That's a given. But sometimes you see people, perhaps if they can do 80 kilos in that movement, uh, load the resistance to double that amount, say 160 kilos, and just do a partial movement. That's not totally invalid. Uh, but as a procedure that you adopt for every exercise, uh, you can't expect results. And what you can expect is joint irritation. You cannot use a great deal of weight beyond your capacity, to go through a full range of movement, and not expect some kind of connective tissue strain and skeletal, um, depending on the exercise, compression. As we get older, uh, muscular conditioning becomes more and more important, but your skeletal structure becomes somewhat more fragile. So going through the full range of movement from a time when you're relatively young and continuing throughout your life is a preferred procedure, in my opinion, and in the opinion of a great many exercise physiologists. So keep that phrase in mind, the range of motion of the exercise, ROM for abbreviation. So when you perform your exercise, try and adhere to that as much as possible. A side note on that, in an attempt to increase the range of motion, people make several mistakes. One of the mistakes they make is to hyperextend the joint that is involved in the movement. For example, take the previous example of a barbell curl. To extend fully, so your elbow joint is fully extended under resistance, can lead to elbow irritation. The same way with the bench press should be lowered to the sternum. Many people who have not been instructed properly, in an attempt to increase the range of motion, lower the weight to close to their neck. The problem with that is the muscles participating in the movement shift from the chest muscles to more and more the shoulder muscles. And in terms of leverage, it's a very inefficient position, and you can incur severe shoulder joint irritation. So be cautious in your attempt to extend the range of motion unnecessarily. Keep in mind, as long as the muscle is fully extended and fully contracted, you'll be fine. Okay, so range of motion. Proper breathing. Okay, again, people make the mistake that they don't understand why proper breathing is necessary. But briefly and concisely, as the muscle contracts, you exhale, and you inhale as the muscle extends. So again, going back to the bicep curl, you would inhale at the beginning of the exercise before you begin, exhale as you move through the range of motion, and inhale as you return to a fully extended position. Why do we do that? What's the reasoning? The reasoning is whenever you strain the muscle close to its maximum contractile capacity, you incur what's called the Valsalva effect. And the Valsalva effect compresses the heart muscle, which is why the heart becomes strengthened in small dosages. Aerobic conditioning, as we've talked about in the past, increases the size of the four chambers of the heart. And resistance training increases the walls of the heart. So the heart becomes stronger. So heart stroke volume is improved, meaning the amount of blood that the heart pumps with each beat, with each stroke. So it's a advantageous change in the body. But in the extreme, one of the side effects of this is your blood pressure rises precipitously. If you're handling very, very heavy weights and the position of your body is in such that your diaphragm is compressed, say, for example, a squat or a deadlift, your blood pressure will rise extremely high. And if you're doing multiples of your body weight, which powerlifters do and weightlifters do, and you see some people who are not schooled in how to do this, it will push your blood pressure dangerously high. A normal blood pressure is 120 over 80. If you're doing multiple of body weights in a squat and you're going deep and come up, as you come up, your blood pressure can go as high as 600. That is dangerously high, and it causes the results of, well, in the extreme, brain hemorrhages and heart attacks. But let's not go into that. That's definitely an extreme, and only very, very avid powerlifters will go to that level. However, when you squat down into a traditional squat and you come up, your blood pressure will rise. There's no doubt about that. So be sure when you perform an exercise like that, where you're compressing your diaphragm and you're in a folded position, that you certainly exhale as you lift the weights, and that will alleviate the rise in blood pressure. The worst thing you can do is hold your breath. And in some of the videos that we viewed on the Tuesday evening, and you see people, foolish people, working out foolishly in gyms, and they lift a very, very heavy weight, something they are almost incapable of doing. And the reasons why they do that are multiple. I'm not going to get into that. And they hold their breath throughout the entire movement. Well, the movement, if it's a very heavy weight, can take several seconds. And if they hold their breath, the heart muscle will be contracted to the point where they will pass out and faint. And they will be revived usually, so it's not that serious. But if you pass out in the gym where there are weights and equipment around you, and you happen to hit your head on the corner of a piece of equipment, you can result in serious injury. So keep that in mind. The Valsalva effect is something you should be very, very aware of. Again, deep breathing, inhale deeply before you begin the exercise, and exhale slowly as you go through the full range of motion, and you won't have any problems. It's just something to keep in mind. And perhaps if you're working out with friends and acquaintances that you see doing that, you might bring this to their attention. Okay. Recovery time. So generally, and this is coming under a great deal of scrutiny recently. It has been traditionally that you rest 48 hours before you attempt to apply stimulus to the muscle you're trying to condition. Keep in mind that you do not develop and get stronger while you're doing the exercise. You develop and get stronger while you're recovering from the exercise. So that's a key point, I think, to remember. 48 hours is probably minimum. If you're handling very, very heavy weight for 3 to 5 repetition range, then sometimes 5 to 7 days, depending on the individual, is recommended. Recently, even the 48-hour rule has been looked at very closely, and people feel that more recovery is necessary. It seems that in resistance training, it's one of two mistakes are predominant, and that is the person uses too much resistance, the weight is too heavy, or it's too light, and you don't get the result that you're looking for. So keep that in mind. Rest, and in the resting recovery stage, get plenty of sleep and eat well. And of course, that goes without saying, but some people, in their pursuit of either weight loss or some other objective, don't pay sufficient attention to what they should do in that 48 hours or, more recently, 72 hours rest period. Keep in mind that in any exercise, there are primary movers and secondary movers to the exercise. For example, the bench press. The primary mover of the bench press is the chest, even though the bench press is designed to strengthen the shoulders. And the secondary movers are the shoulder and the triceps. So if you do the bench press on one day and you designate the following day as a rest day, and you work triceps and shoulders on those days, well, then your triceps and shoulders haven't had a chance to recuperate, and you will not achieve the results you're looking for. So personally, I separate my exercise routine into 3 days. So all of the pushing muscles, chest, shoulders, and triceps, one day. All the pulling muscles, back, trapezius, biceps, the next day. And the third day, leg work. So that's ample time. It's 72 hours at least between the time that I stimulate the muscle again. So pay attention to this. I think people tend to be overeager. They want the results very quickly, and I understand that, certainly. But keep in mind that rest is ultimately important, and that's when you achieve the results that you're looking for. So that's a general assessment. 48 to, let's give it, let's place credit where it's reasonable. Between 48 and 72 hours rest period between stimulating or exercising the same muscle. So let's leave it there. What about between sets? Well, again, there's some discussion about this. Depending on your objective, what is the purpose of the resting and recovering between multiple sets of an exercise? The purpose of this, we're getting into a little bit of biochemistry here. In the muscle cells, you have a cellular component called adenosine triphosphate. I'm sure you've heard of it, ATP. And that's the energy that supplies muscular contraction. In the energy chain we've discussed in previous episodes. ATP is generated by muscular glycogen, which is in turn supplied by glycogen stored in the liver, which is generated by the breakdown of sugar or fat. So, not to get too deeply into biochemistry. So what happens when you exercise and you strain, ATP gets broken down into ADP and adenosine diphosphate. And depending on how much you exercise and to what level of resistance you're using, there can be a total breakdown or a partial breakdown of the cellular ATP. So the purpose of rest between sets is to allow the broken down ATP to regenerate and to give you energy to continue with the prescribed 4 sets or 8 sets or 10 sets or whatever level of intensity you're using. So the higher the intensity being the amount of weight you're using. Lately, intensity has come to mean slightly different things, but let's take intensity as being, the definition of intensity is how much resistance you're using. That can be changed somewhat, but let's not get too complicated. If you lift a very, very heavy weight, and again, we're talking about multiples of body weight, you will need more than 1 minute to rest, which is the normally advocated 1 minute rest between sets. You will need as much as 5 minutes, if not longer. When you strain the muscles to that extent, when you break down ATP to the extent that very heavy lifting does, you need more time for that to recuperate. And that's the biochemical aspect. Plus, the strain on the muscle needs to be given a little bit of a rest before it can proceed. So, at least 1 minute between sets, and up to whatever you're comfortable with. The only caution that I make is that if you rest too long, then the muscle, in general terms, cools down. And as a result, if you totally rested, say for several minutes, then you may have to go through the warm-up phase again, which is kind of tedious. Let me clarify this. Let me give you an example. For example, I do a bench press, and say my objective of the day is to bench press 200 kilos. Say that's a long time ago, but say say that 200 kilos represents twice my body weight. So that's a significant amount of weight. You can't just jump in and do that because the muscles and the connective tissue, ligaments and tendons, have not been fully warmed, and blood flow has not been sent to those ligaments and tendons. So they are more their flexibility, the elasticity of the connective tissue is not quite ready yet. So you precede that maximum expenditure of strength, say 200 kilos, and you warm up with, say, 80 kilos for 10 repetitions. And then you go to 120 for like 5 or 6 repetitions. And you go to 150 for like 2 or 3 repetitions. So at that point, the ligaments and tendons and the muscles, blood flow has occurred. Those muscles' elasticity has, and the ligaments and tendons have improved. So you can perform the maximum lift of, say, 200 kilos with impunity. And that's what the warm-up is about. Now, as you go up the ladder in terms of how much weight you're lifting, you will need more rest between those sets. But suppose I do 150 kilos and I'm ready to do 200 kilos and I get distracted. And I talk to a friend of mine and we're talking whatever. And so 10 to 15 minutes have passed. Well, now the blood has receded from the ligaments and tendons. And so they have returned, probably not entirely, but partially, to the point where their elasticity is not as much as if you had not rested that long. And that's a very individual choice. And it is specific to body type. It's specific to a lot of things. So I encourage you not to wait too long, but to give yourself, if you're lifting very heavy weights, sufficient time to recover and to allow the ATP to regenerate. So that's the purpose of rest. As I just mentioned, normally it's about 30 seconds to a minute between sets. Now, if you're using this time under training, or time under tension, I should say, time under tension training technique, where you do the relatively high repetitions between 12 and 15 repetitions, and the resistance is very light, to increase the intensity, as far as that definition goes, the rest time is very, very short, say 20 seconds. Again, that is individuals react to this differently, depending on their state of health, their state of conditioning, their body type, experience, several things. So just keep in mind that rest sufficiently to allow yourself to recover. You can't judge how much ATP is being regenerated or rebuilt. You can't judge that. That's not really a subjective analysis. If you just feel refreshed and you're mentally and physically you feel prepared to do another set, then simply proceed. And just be cautious, especially in the heavier weights you're lifting. Heavy weights have an impact on the human body that is probably not in the best interest of your state of health. But people do it all the time, and they survive. I've survived, and I used to lift very, very, very heavy weights, although I certainly have certain joint difficulties as I age. Okay, so recovery time. 48 hours to 72 hours between stimulating one muscle group, and between 1 minute and 5 or 6 minutes, depending on how much resistance you're using, unless you're using very lightweight and you want to increase the intensity by that definition, then you can limit the rest time between sets. So I think that's sufficiently covers all of the different aspects of recovery time. Fourth item you should be aware of is what is delayed onset muscle soreness, what people call DOMS, DOMS. So delayed onset muscle soreness, what it is, according to the best research that I am aware of, is that as you exercise, if the exercise involves a heretofore unattempted resistance, that sounds fancy. If you lift a weight you're not used to, for whatever prescribed repetitions, and the muscle is not conditioned to that level of intensity, then what happens is small tears occur in the muscle fibers. Stress hormones find their way into those tears and create an inflammation. And that's what causes delayed onset muscle soreness. Now, that can be, as I just mentioned, the level of resistance you're using. You haven't used, say you've been using 50 kilos for 15 repetitions, and now you decide, well, I'd like to explore the power aspects of weight training, so I'm going to drop it down to 6 repetitions and try 100 kilos. Well, your body's not used to that, obviously. And so the resultant strain is too much for the body to adapt. And as a result, you get these injuries. It's an injury. It's a tear. So that's what happens. It also happens if you try a different exercise. For example, if you're doing bench presses and incline bench presses, and all of a sudden you go to, well, I'd like you to do dumbbell flies, because I see people laying on the bench and doing this. That seems like a good exercise, so I'll do that. And you change to that. Well, even though it still involves the chest muscles, it involves the chest muscles working in a different way than the bench press. So again, the muscles have not adapted to that, especially if you go reasonably heavy. And so you get the same thing. You get delayed onset muscle soreness. Same procedure takes place. So it is a qualitative and a quantitative effect of unexplored training regimens. So how do you eliminate it? Well, depends on the severity, certainly. There was a time in my life when I had a period where I could not train for about 6 weeks. And so the first chance I get, I went to the gym, and I spent hours and hours doing every exercise that I knew. And the next day I was hospitalized because I could not move without excruciating pain. So from the hospital, they gave me shots to reduce the muscle tightness and to reduce the inflammation. And after a couple of days, I could walk and move around, and I left. But it can get to be that serious. Be cautious. The normal way, if it is a slight muscular discomfort, there is a way to speed the recovery process. It is probably not advocated by most responsible people, but if you really want to eliminate the amount of time it takes to recover, usually if you just leave it alone, it takes maybe 5 or 7, 8, 9, 10 days, depending on intensity. If you want to minimize that, you do the same exercises that caused the problem in the first place, but very, very lightly. Perhaps 1/3 of the resistance you used with the exercise that caused the delayed onset muscle soreness. And it's not comfortable. You have to be cautious. You can't jump into it. Be cautious with the resistance, very, very light. And as you exercise, you'll see that it's becoming easier and there's less and less discomfort. What that does, it flushes the stress hormones out of those small tears. It doesn't heal the tears, but it allows the tears to heal more rapidly. I would train for marathons, and I would eliminate weight training for, say, 3 months prior to a marathon and concentrate only on conditioning for a full marathon, which was fine. So then the day after the marathon, I would jump right back into heavy training and had severe delayed onset muscle soreness. But I knew exactly how much I could tolerate. And so even though I had it, the following day I did it very lightly, and in 3 days I was back regular training. It did accelerate the healing process, but it is not pleasant, and as you're going through it, it can be extremely painful. Again, I don't necessarily recommend it, but there is a way to speed the process as long as you're careful. Otherwise, simply rest. If you're having a severe pain, just simply rest. If you've ever run a full marathon, people who have not conditioned sufficiently for the 42 kilometers, 26-mile run, the next day they're trying to walk, and the hip flexors, the ones that pick up the leg, not the ones that drive you as you place the foot and drive yourself forward, but the muscles that pick up the leg, which are very, very weak. After 42 kilometers, and if your stride is 1 meter, that's 21,000 times during a full marathon that you will stimulate your hip flexors. So of course they're being overworked. And of course you're going to experience exactly this. And normally people just take hot baths, promote circulation, and in a week or so it's all right. But if you, like somebody like myself, who is foolish enough to want to get back into heavy training immediately, then you take this extreme remedial approach. Okay, so let's talk about overtraining. What are the signposts? How do you know when you've overtrained? Well, the obvious technique is you're fatigued. It doesn't matter how much you sleep, you can't eliminate the fatigue that you've induced by too much exercise. So nutrition helps, sleep certainly helps, rest certainly helps. There are different levels of overtraining. If you go to the gym and you don't feel like it, now that's very subjective. I don't feel like training today. That can be a multiplicity of reasons. Maybe you're having trouble at home. Maybe you're worried about paying your bills. Maybe you've got some kind of stress in the workplace, and you just don't feel like training. Well, that's okay once in a while. But we are creatures of habit, and both habitual behavior in terms of doing things and habitual behavior in not doing things. So if you don't feel like it, and you don't, and then the next day you don't feel like it either, and this continues for a week or 2 weeks, now not exercising becomes the habit. And let's face it, exercise is as much habit as it is anything. It's the habit of going to the gym. You structure your life around going to the gym. Either you get up very early, or you take off work early, or whatever. You make time to go to the gym. Well, when you don't do that, you fill up your time with something else, usually. And so that becomes the new behavioral approach to your life. That's what you do. So the danger in overtraining is as much damage to the body as it is damaging your whole perspective on the importance and the relevance and the commitment to exercise. Uh, I don't take the commitment to exercise lightly. Uh, I don't think anybody listening should. It is a serious commitment. It's not fun. It is beneficial, and there are reams and reams of information testimonial to the benefits of exercise, even more and more lately than ever before. It used to be that exercise was good for you. Now it's just almost mandatory if you want to live a high quality of life. So you should do whatever you can to maintain the habit of doing that. Overtraining will discourage you from doing it. So you want to be cautious. Err on the side of caution. When you're training, you will have days where you feel very, very energized. And it doesn't seem to change with what you eat or how you eat or amount of. Certainly, maintaining a normal lifestyle will give you sufficient energy to work out. But if you work out too hard and too consistently and too long, you're tired. And there are other factors involved. The body will tell you, listen, we don't want to do this. We've exercised enough. Okay. And it's almost like your body's another person or another group of people. So my suggestion is if you don't feel like exercising, go to the gym anyways and do your normal routine very, very lightly. Just go through the motions. If you're using 100 kilos on a bench press, drop it down to the bar and 5 kilos on each side. So maybe about 30 kilos. And just do 2 or 3 sets. Or do an exercise that you have been thinking of doing, but you never tried. So try that exercise. Just keeping your interest maintained and the habit of going to the gym. And I think you'll find that pretty soon you'll get through this overtraining period. So your appetite will return. You won't feel as fatigued. You can get back into it with renewed enthusiasm. One of the problems is, of course, injury, and you just have to give that injury time to heal. In many cases, delayed onset muscle soreness is an injury. It is an injury. So if one set of muscles are subjected to, again, what we previously discussed, delayed onset muscle soreness, do a different exercise. If you have your shoulder is injured, you can always do legs and stomach work. Not to work out sets a pattern that is not beneficial to you, believe me. But there are times when it's just too much and you back away. There's a psychological state of mind called positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. And if you exercise so much that you're fatigued and you're broken down the next day, that's negative reinforcement, and it's a disincentive for you to continue. If you feel energized and better after your workout than you did before you came to the gym, that's positive reinforcement. You feel better. And if you feel better, the chances are you will continue. The idea is not that exercise is something to do while you're young or while you're an athlete or while you're in school or whatever. Exercise is something that almost every expert agrees upon should be part of your lifestyle. It doesn't have to be every day, but minimum 2, optimum 4 to 6 days a week. Something as little as taking a walk or walking the dog. That's still exercise. It's not a lot of exercise, depending on the size of your dog, but it is still an effort. And it takes you beyond just sitting down, especially in this era, the Corona era. People are sitting more and more, and their physical condition is deteriorating to the point where illness sets in. So the extreme overtraining for all of you athletes out there is something called myofascial pain syndrome. And this is an overtraining injury, but it's subtle. What happens is the actin and myosin, the protein filaments of the muscle, contract and expand like this. That's when you lift the weight, they contract. When you lower the weight, they expand. So just like this, okay? Well, if you do this repetition either partially for many, many repetitions or too extensively, what happens is the muscle fibers stay like this. They don't go back. And that causes nerve irritation, and that can be extremely painful. Years ago, wow, it's got to be 20 years ago, there used to be a magazine called The Physician in Sports Medicine. And this was brought up, myofascial pain syndrome. And I read about it and I said, oh, that's interesting. Wow, I don't have that. But it was interesting what happened to the fascia work in the muscle. Well, then all of a sudden I had a slight lower back problem. It wasn't the lower back per se. It's there's the gluteus, basically the muscles in your butt. No polite way to say it. So there's the major glutes and the minor glutes. The minor glutes are very close to the sacroiliac, the curvature of the hip bone, and those became convulsed, and it got to the point where I couldn't walk straight. And I said, "Wow, this is really painful. Can I be the only person who has this?" Well, in the interim, the last 20 years, I've treated a lot of people with this, primary athletes who do much too much work. Again, it's not necessarily lifting very heavy weights. It's lifting or doing it, not lifting weight. Lifting weights is kind of a balanced approach to muscular conditioning. But doing activities that stress only one particular muscle as opposed to the other muscles either surrounding it or near it. And that particular muscle, after many, many repetitions, becomes convulsed. So what's the cause? The cause is hyperactivity, usually in a limited range of motion. The solution is not simple. When these muscles convulse, they convulse on what they call trigger points. And for all of you who are internet buffs, you can type in myofascial pain syndrome or trigger points, and it will clarify. There are a myriad of trigger points throughout the body. And usually, well, in my case, it certainly was, that particular point was the point that was being irritated. It was extremely painful. So what the remedy is, you do digital intervention, which means you either take an object about the size of your thumb, and you place it upon the exact point where it's most painful, and you apply pressure, 60% pressure for 1 minute and then 100% pressure for the next minute. And that will separate those convulsed muscle fibers. Well, to say that it is uncomfortable is certainly an understatement. I have had literally exceptional athletes cry when I have applied these techniques. But they are very, very happy when the pain has been diminished. It doesn't go, one treatment of this doesn't go away forever. It usually comes back because the actions that cause that are embedded in that person's lifestyle or that person's athletic pursuit. The other option is injections of medication. Stretching doesn't seem to affect it, although it will prevent the onset to a certain extent. This digital intervention works. It doesn't make people happy when it's applied. And again, it would be nice if you didn't have to do it in the first place. When I did it, shooting pains went up and down my leg and into my middle back, and it was extremely torturous. But it went away. Trouble is, I had to do it 2 or 3 times a day for, well, ongoing. Even now, there are times when it flares up and you have to take care of it. So again, flexibility will help to a certain extent. Strengthening the muscles in an area in a balanced way will help to a certain extent. When it occurs, you really, outside of being injected with pain relievers and relaxants, outside of that, basically digital intervention is the most, I wouldn't say the most effective, but it's the most easily attained. In Japan, we have shiatsu people who are very expert in pressure point and where they are, and they will probably they could probably assist you if you are looking for somebody knowledgeable to do that. Okay, so that's an extreme condition of overtraining, myofascial pain syndrome. So there's 2 more that you should be aware of, and this is getting a lot of attention here in Japan as well, called RICE, R-I-C-E, rest, icing, compression, elevation. Now, this is primarily about something like sprained ankles where swelling has occurred. It can also happen on knee joints, so shoulder joints as well. Well, as a matter of fact, shoulder, elbow, knee, ankle. Whenever there is some, if you touch the area and it feels warm, that usually an indication of some kind of inflammation. And resting the affected area, icing it is certainly optimal. But you have to be cautious because some injuries do not respond well to icing. Some injuries respond more to heat. And that's basically experimentation. If icing works, 1 session will relieve the discomfort. If it doesn't work, 2 or 3 sessions with the ice, well, this doesn't work, try heat. That's it. Process of elimination. You don't have to worry about ice in terms of ice cubes. Right now in most drugstores, they have these jellied bags filled with a gelled substance that put in the freezer maintains its jellied consistency, but it's just the same temperature as ice. It's very cold. And it conforms to the joint that you wish to remove the inflammation. So I suggest you use that. Rest it, ice it. Compression, not excessive compression, but enough to make sure that the deep-seated point of concern is being affected by the icing that you apply. And elevation, elevating higher than your heart. So certainly lower body effects, knees and ankles are certainly affected. Shoulder, just basically maintaining prone position, lifting your elbow up so it's a little bit higher than your heart, and putting the ice or resting your elbow in a high position and icing it. That will help. So remember that. Rest, ice, compression, elevation. And the last seems kind of a no-brainer, but I see it all the time. When you are lifting with a barbell and even with a dumbbell, make sure that there's a collar adhering the weight to the bar. I cannot tell you. And make sure the collar is on firmly, tight. I cannot tell you how many people I've seen who ignore that simple suggestion. And they say, well, it's okay. I'm just doing a very short movement and it's not a big deal. And then they lose their balance and the bar goes off one way, then the other. Free weights, as opposed to machines, are the preferred method of muscular conditioning. Almost every exercise physiologist will agree. The only exception is that exercises you cannot perform with free weights. For example, leg extensions, leg curls. You can, but machines are easier. Uh, Perhaps in a future broadcast, we'll get into why free weights are easier. Just take my word for it. Free weights affect the muscles that provide stability to the joints, and machines don't. So that's the crux of it. There's another thing called straight line contraction as opposed to natural contraction. Free weights are natural contraction. Machines are straight lines. So you're training the muscles in the way that the machine is determined, not you, and that may not be optimal. So free weights are preferred, but keep in mind, free weights are tools for your development. They are also weapons of your destruction. And it happens, believe me. People go down in a squat. They haven't put the collars on the bar. They're having a heavy weight. They lose balance. The bar goes off, and they twist their back. It happens all the time. People do a bench press. They don't have anybody spotting them. They don't put the collars on the weight, so they either tip the bar one side or the other, and either they dislocate a shoulder, or in the worst case scenario, the bar winds up on their neck and they literally kill themselves. Barbells and dumbbells are tools and they are weapons. You're dealing with gravity and centrifugal force. These are forces of nature, and if you ignore the precautions, they will hurt you significantly. And oh, well, machines are better. Well, they're not. And the reason they're not is because machines give you the illusion of safety. And if you misuse the machines, you will get injured just the same as if you ignore precautions regarding barbells and dumbbells, you will get injured. We see dumbbells in the gym that are solid. Well, the chrome-plated ones are not solid. The ends of the dumbbell are screwed on, and they get loose. So before you pick up a dumbbell, you should look at, especially the chrome-plated ones, and make sure that they're tight, and you don't drop one on your foot. And I've seen it, and the videos that we show on Tuesday night, it just staggers the mind, the level of ignorance demonstrated in the gym. It causes severe injury. It's just amazing. I'm surprised. Number one, I'm surprised that gyms allow it. In Japan, it's not permitted. You do, even on the Smith machine where the bar is anchored, the trainers will continue to tell you to keep the collars on the weight, which is a very good idea. It's a habit. Along those lines, if you're training with a friend and you're joking and you're talking about something else and you forget, or you put on a 5 kilo plate and your friend puts on a 2.5 kilo plate, or you put on a 15 kilo plate and your friend puts on a 20 kilo plate, and then you try and lift the weights and you wind up off balance, and if the collars are on or if they're not on, you still get injured. Normally the gym is structured. A proper gym will instruct you about these things before you even begin. You will get an orientation. But I do some work in Yokohama at a gym that has no orientation, that has no instruction except from me, or friends come in and tell people what to do and they don't know what they're doing. And it's not bad. And if I see it, I admonish them saying, this is the proper way to do it. And I see people who do not put the collars on, and they say, but, it's not a but, put the collars on. You want to save yourself a trip to the hospital. Again, we're talking potential, possibilities. It may not happen. But for the few seconds that it takes for that level of precaution, it's simply not worth not doing it. So please put the collars on the bar. Check the dumbbells. Be aware of other people around you, what they're doing. Don't lift too heavy. Don't lift, well, at least if you lift too light, you probably won't injure yourself. But be cautious. The gym is a wonderful place. It will enhance you in ways that are just too numerous to name. Physically, physiologically, health-wise, mental, stress relief, enhancement of your own value in your own eyes, by a standard that you control. I can't tell you the benefits; they're just too numerous to name. And I hope that on this broadcast in English and in future broadcasts, what I suggest to you, again, it's a suggestion. You have a choice of to listen and to take into consideration what I have to offer or not. But please be careful. Regardless of the potential for enhancement, the more intense you work out, the higher the risk. There is risk. There is risk. But an intelligent, common sense approach obliterates, or certainly ameliorates, the risk that you are involved in. So I've talked for about an hour. We haven't got a lot of people that have tuned in, but this will be recorded, so perhaps I can. People might want to refer to this in the future. These 7 points I've iterated are basic. And they're not all of the things in consideration, but if you take these precautions, I'm sure you can alleviate a great deal of personal discomfort, if not injury. Again, thank you for joining, and I hope to see you next Thursday. Next Thursday on the 18th, I have a friend of mine, Chuck Johnson, who is American Taekwondo national champion and who teaches Taekwondo to children and teaches action to aspiring actors and actresses in Japan. Very interesting guy, a very good friend of mine, and I hope you will tune in and listen to what he and I have to say. Look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week, hopefully. Good night.